Welcome to another video that you might want to avoid for so long but ended up watching anyway. So basically, I'm also on the same boat as you are. I try to avoid this type of videos as much as I can because their takes are usually the same. But curiosity kills the cat and I ended up watching Candybbug's video. I... I don't know what to say. I'm not mad, it's just exhausting to watch. I know because I made a video criticizing Genshin 2 when I returned, and I won't lie, that video made me who I am today, even though I am known as a lore channel after I uploaded my Imagine Theater, but that's besides the point. I actually did not plan to make this video, but her takes are actually interesting enough that makes me want to make a video out of it, so here we are. Now, before we proceed, just know that I am here not to react on her video, but to give you my analysis on what she said and what I think as a lore content creator, a meta player, and an artist with a degree. Yes, I'm a Bachelor of Design. Shocking, I know. I've been working on plentiful amounts of professional work myself, so I have some experience in the design field, but just because I have that doesn't mean my opinions are absolute. I'm still a human with my own personal taste at the end of the day, so don't take my word as is and take everything I say with a grain of salt. That being said, I'll be as objective as I can, but it'll be inevitable that I'll be putting my subjective opinions on some of the points that she gave, because she has subjective points that I can't really pinpoint based on lore alone, but rather my perspective as an avid enjoyer of this game. Finally, I'm not going into details about the controversial takes that she made, for example, the misogyny and racism. We will get to some of them, but I won't talk about them in great detail and only be on a surface level that I'm at least half my understanding on because it's entering a territory that is not within my field of expertise. I'm a guy, I'm also from Southeast Asia, so I'm not really part of the representation that the game is presenting, so I don't have any strong emotion that some players had, so again, I'll be as fair as I possibly could, while still giving you my opinion as respectful as possible. Like I always said, don't be offended by other people's opinions. You can agree or disagree, but don't be rude to others just because you have a different opinion. It's just a game, it's not that deep, and don't take it seriously. Also, please don't send any more malicious comments or threats towards Candybbug. Even though her takes can be terrible, there is still a person with human emotions behind the scenes and persona she is in. None of the things she said are worth the threats for, and if you're still sending one to her, then sorry not sorry, you're the problem, not her. As always, don't forget to give this video a like and comment so the channel can be noticed by the algorithm. My name is Glitchxcity and I make lore and commentary videos on the channel to keep you company. Before we continue, I just want to let you guys know that I am opening art commissions on Vgen. If you're interested in supporting this channel, click the link in the description or pinned comment and check my portfolio there if you're interested. Alright, now back to the video. Here we are, the very first thing that she talked about and is the elephant of the room according to Candybbug. Natlan. Over time, I grew to love this nation even more, but even during the Natlan hate reign, I love this nation based on its lore and exploration alone. That being said, one thing that I don't really like about Natlan is its character design, and that is still true until today. I don't necessarily dislike them, I think they're pretty good, and for the concept it has, I think it's quite solid, but for my personal taste, it's not really up there for me. I actually watched my past videos of Natlan era commentaries and most of my opinions remain the same, albeit I do think I should have worded it better back then. Young Nico was too frontal with his words. Like last time, I can't say anything about the skin colors. Not necessarily because I don't know the history, but it's not within my field of expertise. I'm not the one being represented and I can only talk about them based on their design as is. For design specifically, we will talk about them in a separate section, but just know that as a whole, I think they match Natlan's aesthetics very well. They have a very solid theme, which is loud contrast colors with sharp patterns all over them. It's also shown in the environments as well, whether by color palettes, ambience, music, and even the mountains. By environments, I personally love exploring Natlan. I think the Saurian indwelling is one of the best things that they made in this game so far, but I do wish we can fly as Cuckosaur within Natlan's first batch of the map. For context, the Flowerfeather clan was released 2 patches after the area from Children of Echoes to Stadium of the Sacred Flame initially released. Because of this, the Cuckoo Soar's flying capability was limited to the areas surrounding Masters of the Night Winds, Flower Feather Clan, and Collective of Plenty. You can fly as a Cuckoo Soar in the older area, it's just that you don't have enough logiston to be able to fly for longer. The only way you can do this is if you have Chaska, Ifa, Mavuika, Knich, Oberon, or Citlali and use their Night Soul transmission, but you are required to have the character, so I can't really count on that. That's just my personal opinion, but let me know what you think. Regardless, one thing that I can agree is how jarring the 5-star lineup of Natlan is, because we only have one male 5-star character, that being Knich. Even if we count the 4-star, we only have 3 in total, that being Oberon and Ifa. It doesn't really bother me that much, but I do think this is a valid criticism to have. I remember finding it strange how the male casts are so little, especially since Capitanos seemed like a potential playable candidate before they offed him. There's still a chance that he'll return and become playable, but we'll revisit this later because it's related to her villain problem opinion. The point is the fact that the cast's gender ratio is not balanced, and she acknowledges this with Fontaine as well. That said, I also think this criticism is separate from the quality of the story itself. A region can have a non-balanced roster while still telling a good story, just as balanced roster does not make a story better. Fontaine had more female casts, and it was well received by the players. Inazuma is the same case, but it didn't get the same reaction. I said this in my Natlan commentary and my past design analysis videos, and I'll say it again. What's done is done. We can't change anything about it, and realistically, neither could Toyo at this point because changing an entire region's cast after release is unrealistic given how much time, planning, writing, voice acting, and development goes into these characters. Whether the final product is controversial or not is a completely different subject in this matter, and you are allowed to dislike their decision over it, and the most they can really do is adjust future release based on feedback. From what we've seen so far, I believe Notcry and Snezhnaya appear to be moving toward a more balanced ratio, and that's only counting with who we were introduced. But back to Natlan, she also has a problem with the story, and this is my line of expertise. So lore nerds, get ready. I do think some of the things she said are missing the point, especially when she says that Oberon doesn't really push the narrative further. The thing is, that's not really the case, and if anything, he is the crucial part of the story because without him, the 6 heroes of Natlan wouldn't be complete. We have a full-on section on why he is important, and it's also related to Capitano. I have to say, however, she did make some good points. Some of the Natlan is felt like accessories, but I wouldn't word it like that, because that's not really what happened either. If anything, I'd say the right word is underutilized or not explored enough. Most of them actually do something for the story. For example, Kachina's introduction to Natlan shows us why the Natlanis want to go on Night Warrior Wars, even though it could risk them in losing their lives. Moalani saved Kachina from the Night Kingdom and resulting in activating her ancient name. Shilonen and Citlali created our ancient name throughout Act 3 to Act 5, and Chaska helped infiltrate Capitano's camp to find information on what they were doing. That said, there are 2 characters that I think were underutilized compared to the rest of the casts, Knich and Yansan. We don't really learn much about Knich even in his own Tribal Chronicles, but I give them the benefit of the doubt because Tribal Chronicles are meant to learn about the tribes instead of the individual characters. That being said, he doesn't really do anything that is remotely memorable from the story, and we only get to learn more about him in Fontaine in one of the limited filler events. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If anything, it's good that they made an event entirely about him because we finally get to learn more about his story. But if they were to do that, I do think it would be better if they made us learn more about him in the main story than a limited event. Yansan though, I don't know, she definitely fell into the telling but not showing category. She did have her moments during Natlan's small interlude chapter back in 5.2, and it really does feel like an Yansan story quest because it shows her involvement in helping the Flowerfeather clan's recovery. But that's the most interaction we have on her, and it's sad because she was the better character in Travail. I don't really have a lot of things to say about her, but I think that fact is also one of the biggest problems because Yansan wasn't shown enough in the story. She's also not the main character of the Tribal Chronicles, but again, I can't really say a lot about her. That's the most I can go for. Beyond that are topics that are way out of my expertise. All in all, I think they're underexplored rather than unnecessary because Konichi and Yansan are still important to Mavuika's plan. It's just that unlike Shilonen, who also got her ancient name activated off screen, they don't really explore these characters enough. Now Mavuika. I feel like I didn't word it better back then because I said she is a Merisu, which is also the same sentiment that Candy has. I have to admit, I have to agree on this one, and I know it's a controversial take, but I actually have a completely different opinion why I think Mavuika is a Merisu compared to how I worded it back then and what Candy says in her video. Okay, Mavuika is not a Merisu by any means, but how she is portrayed in the Archon Quest does make her feel like a Merisu. See the difference? Admittingly in the past, the online discourse did make me think of her as a full-on Merisu, but now I don't really share that sentiment anymore. Let me explain why. So the traits that actually made her not a Merisu is the fact that she is reckless, stubborn, and self-sacrificing. The same thing I said in my analysis video. If I had to add another one, she is quite impulsive, especially in the final acts where she thinks sacrificing herself is the correct answer when there's another way to solve the Abyss problem for good. However, like I said in my Mavuika analysis, these traits are overshadowed by how her plans just go the way she wanted without any severe consequences. The problem with Mavuika is that her flaws exist, but the narrative often resolves problems in a way that validates her decisions. Oberon conventionally activates his ancient name in front of Mavuika and Capitano in the middle of their arguments. Chaska managed to activate her ancient name in the middle of the huge Abyss War in Act 4, and Mavuika is saved by Capitano before she could sacrifice herself. This is why a lot of players, including myself, point out how everything just works out for her. Now to be fair, she lost her people and had to leave her parents eventually. But in the Nation of War, where losing someone is pretty much something they have been dealing with for centuries and millennia, the consequences are bound to happen whether Mavuika has a plan or not. Let's take this another way. We learn in Natlan's second act of Archon Quest that Natlan is fated to be destroyed at least 500 years after the Cataclysm, and this is the main reason why Mavuika traveled 500 years into the future, making a 500-year-old plan by having certain ancient names to be awakened the moment she is returned, and as a leader and the one that made this plan, she wants to see this plan in motion until the very end, even if she has to see her nation to be destroyed. The reasons she couldn't do it during her era was because Natlan already dealing so much losses and they had to recover until they're ready for battle, hence why the 500-year-old gap. Now whether Mavuika made this plan or not, Natlan is fated to lose so much during her time traveling into the future anyway, because again, they are facing the Abyss. This is why I said the consequences are bound to happen whether Mavuika has a plan or not, because the damage is something that is already ingrained in Natlan from the very beginning, where they're destined to fight against the Abyss after Xabalanque won against Xiuquatl. By extension, Mavuika is not a Merisu, but how the game portrays her makes her appear to be one. Remember, this allegation didn't come out of nowhere, and for people that don't follow the lore much, it's understandable why a lot of people find her to be that way. The problem is not that Mavuika never suffers consequences. The problem is that many of those consequences come from the Abyss itself rather than her personal flaws or mistakes. Since Candy said she is not a lore expert, I think this is what she meant, and if it is, then I share the same sentiment. She also states Natlan to be the power of friendship coded, and she doesn't like that. To be fair, the whole story of Genshin Impact is tied to the power of friendship, albeit Natlan is the most notable with this trope. If we count the Genshin story as a whole, I'm mixed with this, because the trope wasn't that noticeable to begin with, but I can see the reason why. For Natlan specifically, I have to disagree with this notion because Natlan is meant to be the power of friendship trope. Their whole story is to be united in order to triumph against the Abyss. That's the core story of Natlan, and it spreads even outside the Archon Quest. If anything, the fact Mavuika chose to fight alone against the Abyss does bother me because it goes against the whole mantra that the Natlanis have. No one fights alone. Fair, she fought the Abyss with the Traveler, and even though she made a valid point that she chose to do this because the Abyss can severely harm the 6 heroes, I personally find the ending to be lackluster for this reasoning specifically despite the lore justification. Oh, keep in mind that I'll mention lore justification a lot in this video because that is part of Candy's main argument. I get it, it keeps the lore consistent, but if they were willing to make a Power of Friendship as the finale of Natlan's Archon Quest, I would have loved to see the 6 heroes stand alongside Mavuika and the Traveler in the final battle, and not in spirit like what the game shows us. Even if they couldn't contribute as much as the two of them, it would have reinforced Natlan's central message that no one fights alone. Now, I chose to name this section as Columbina because that is the main criticism that she has. Ironically, I uploaded a video talking about the Futsui rewritten allegation right before this video, so it's just interesting to me that I have to literally repeat what I said in my previous video. So, the core arguments and reasoning why she thought Columbina is butchered is because she is not the biblically accurate angel, like what the fandom portrays her to be. She even played Tartaglia and Wanderer's voice lines to prove this point. Like I said in my previous video, the fandom, or fanon is what I would call, is not wrong because they are building a depiction of Columbina based on the existing lore. So when Tartaglia and Wanderer told the Traveler about Columbina being this unsettling of a character, naturally, the player would think of her as an eldritch or biblically accurate or just straight up creepy character. It doubles down when Yohual Tachutin introduces the angel lore to the Traveler, and an amazing animated short called Stairway to Heaven further pushes this narrative. But that's also part of the problem, and it's not even about the lore at this point, it's the fact that she is basing Columbina off of fanons and calling it a mistake because it didn't meet these interpretations. These depictions are what the players were expecting based on a handful of voice lines, visual symbolism, angel imagery, and the limited information we had prior to Notcry. In reality, we don't know who Columbina is, and very little voice lines that are considered as of he says, she says does not determine the person. Wanderer literally criticizes Capitano even though Tartaglia and Arlecchino find him a respectable man. And remember, these characters, just like humans in real life, have different perspectives on their own co-workers. The next thing she said is that the moon goddess lore on Columbina doesn't make sense and her reasoning not opening her eyes is a last-minute thought. Now, I can see why she said that because she is basing her from the fanon interpretation. But the thing is, the moon lore is not new and it was already introduced to us back in 1.0. Even the name of the moon goddesses, Arya, Sonnets, and Canon, was introduced to us when the game first released, with two of them deceased while one is still alive, albeit never leaving her palace because of her sorrow. Song of the Welkin Moon, however, gives us better context to this where all of them are already deceased, with the Frost Moon is the only one that remained intact. As for Columbina's reasoning for not opening her eyes, she already said that in Act 1 after our second meeting with her, where she always wanted to return to the moon. She knew the sky was false, she knew the moon back then was fake, and not only that, she viewed the Frost Moon sciences back then as greed packaged with faith. That's why she left them in the first place. She also said it directly to us in Act 1.
Reality rewrote the sky in words I could not understand. I did not want to read a tampered version, so I simply stopped looking. The real beginning of my story lies up there, on the moon, forever beyond my reach. Like a message carved for blind hands, sealed away where no fingers can find it.
It's literally the same thing that Columbina said to Canon in Luna IV's Archon Quest. It's just that it adds more context with her own personal feelings.
There was a time when I refused to look upon the world. I believed it was full of nothing but lies and falsehoods. I wished to hide my feelings, seal my heart, until I could return to my true home.
But again, this is just lore justification because at the end of the day, it's up to the player if they find this explanation a satisfying one. Here's one thing that many content creators don't say. Being explainable and being satisfying are not the same thing, because no matter how many times I try to explain the lore and why it's justified, not everyone is going to arrive at the same satisfaction as I have, and that's alright. I personally don't see a problem with it, but considering Columbina's discourse was based on an existing lore, the disappointment is not surprising and is actually understandable. I'm not going to explain further on this because I made a whole topic that is mostly about Columbina in my last video, so you can watch that instead if you need a broader explanation on the Fatui. Now let's move on to the next section. Another criticism that Candy had is the villains not being playable because they need to have lore to be playable. If they're not, they'll kill them off to justify them only being NPCs. I think this is a valid criticism, and many games, heck, let's just take a look at Honkai Star Rail, did the exact thing that Candy pointed out where they made dead and villainous characters to be playable. Now we'll get to the reason why Genshin don't make their dead and villain characters playable, but one thing that she missed the mark is that the Fatui as an organization are often treated as antagonists, but not every member of the Fatui is necessarily a villain, and these two are different definitions that often get mixed into the discussions. I actually am guilty of this as well because I get mixed up with saying villain and antagonist in my last video, but in my defense, English is not my first language, and when I say villain, sometimes I mean antagonist, which is more evident in my subjective section. But that's a language barrier issue rather than definition issue. But speaking of that, let's get to the difference. An antagonist is a character or being that went against the protagonist, while a villain is a wicked or malevolent person or a character in a story who intentionally commits harmful, malicious, or illegal acts. In fiction, they act as the primary antagonist who opposes the hero, creates obstacles, and drives the central conflict. Now you see the difference. A villain can be an antagonist, but not all antagonists are villains. In some stories, a villain is the protagonist, like the Joker movie for example, where Joker is the protagonist while the policemen are the antagonists. In Genshin, Capitano is an antagonist, but he is not a villain because so far, the game never implied him to commit heinous crimes or commit genocide just because he wants to. If anything, he wanted to save Natlan because he genuinely cared for the people of that nation and even carried countless souls inside his heart to the point he could not sleep for hundreds of years. His ideals, however, did not align with Mavuika and the Traveler, hence why he is an antagonist. Now this is the main difference with Totore because he is a villain and an antagonist. He committed unforgivable crimes because of his own curiosity and went against the protagonist, which in this case is the Traveler. He also betrayed his own colleague, which is why the Fatui went completely against him, and even the Sarisa created an edict to execute Totore if they have to. The reason this distinction matters is because many of Genshin's most important conflicts are ideological rather than moral. The Traveler is often fighting people whose goals conflict with theirs, not necessarily people who are evil. Of course, that's within Genshin's sphere, and because I know a lot of players don't care much about the lore, let's take this in another way. Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender is what I would call an antagonist because he spends most of the series hunting the Avatar to regain his honor and prove his worth to his father, Ozai. He does not oppose Aang because he is evil, he opposes Aang because he is misguided, conflicted, and trapped by his upbringing. Eventually, he joins Aang to help defeat the true villain of the story, Fire Lord Ozai. Speaking of villains, since Candy used Cookie Run Kingdom as the example, then let's take the same exact character that she made the sample of, which is Dark Enchantress Cookie. I actually play the game every day and follow the lore, so I have a pretty good grip on this one. Anyways, Dark Enchantress Cookie is actually a good example of a villain who believes she is doing the right thing. Her goal is to free cookies from their fate of being eaten. However, what made her as an actual villain is the fact that she committed genocide among cookie kind. She awakened the beast cookies, she turned herself into a witch, her end goal is to fuse all cookies into one single cookie to become the ultimate cookie, and despite her goal at the end, she is still villain through and through, because she still committed crime that is just unforgivable even though she genuinely believed it's for the greater good. In Genshin, Capitano falls much closer to the Zuko category. He opposes the Traveler and Mavuika, but the story consistently portrays him as honorable and genuinely concerned for Natlan's future. Totore, on the other hand, falls much closer to the Dark Enchantress Cookies category. He is not only an antagonist, but also a villain because he repeatedly harms others in pursuit of his goals. Whether it is human experimentation, manipulation, or sacrificing innocent people for knowledge, Totore consistently prioritizes his curiosity over the well-being of others. With Dark Enchantress Cookies' case, she is driven by her belief to free cookie kinds, even though she causes too much suffering. Now, why do I have to make this distinction? Well, this is where we enter the lore justification side of the spectrum, because even the gacha system in this game has lore. Oh my god, I can't believe I say that. Not as in the currency or your spending habits became lore, but rather the intertwined and acquaint fates that have lore. Both have the same core lore. Once you start wishing upon the stars, you, the traveler, will cross paths with those people and intertwine your fate to those you wished upon. This is the reason why they're called intertwined fates and acquaint fates. Once you obtain those characters, in your account specifically, they canonically join your journey, hence why in all of their introductions, they always feel honored to join us. Considering that lore, this is likely the reason why villains or dead villains / antagonists are not part of the playable roster, because they're fated to die to begin with. Many things in Genshin always play with the core gameplay of immersion, which is why characters like Dottore, who is a villain, are not playable, and characters that are dead antagonists like Capitano and Signora are also not playable. Personally, even as a lore channel, I don't like this as their justification because I want to experience what it feels like to play as the righteous Capitano and the femme fatale Signora. This is the only part I agree with Candy specifically, but her reasoning is the only part that I disagree with. We still have playable antagonists, and just because they're playable doesn't mean everything that made them who they are becomes sunshine and rainbows. Arlecchino still manipulates children to become her soldiers, Wanderer acknowledges that he committed crimes prior to him erasing himself, and Sandrone still acknowledges the fact that she will become an enemy of the Traveler once he arrives in Snezhnaya. The problem was never that Genshin refuses to make antagonists playable. Child, Wanderer, Arlecchino, and Sandrone already proved the opposite. The real question is where Hoyo draws the line between antagonists, villains, and characters whose stories have already concluded. Still, I don't like that idea, and I genuinely think it's way too much of a hassle to make a character playable to begin with. But that's my personal bias. You have no idea how devastated I was when I learned Capitano is dead. So yeah, I can relate with this one. But even so, I think this is what stopped Genshin from making dead characters playable. People often speculate that Genshin could make thousands of dollars making these characters playable, and I agree. They could easily make Signora, Capitano, and Dottore playable if they want to. Heck, they can make the Moon Goddesses playable and they'll make a lot of money doing that. But instead, they chose not to. But the most concrete reason why, let's admit it, we have no idea. Only people that work at Hoyo headquarters know why, and I believe there's an internal reason behind that decision. But they've never publicly explained it, and that's fine. Again, this is way out of my expertise, so I won't say anything more, but I personally find it to be for immersion purposes, and that's just how I see it, so don't take it as a fact. Okay. There's a reason why I don't make this type of videos anymore, as in design analysis videos, because they are taking references from real life and putting it into their character. It contradicts my current beliefs as a lore channel, where I always say never take references into face value, so this is definitely entering a very contradicting area within my beliefs. That said, however, it's true. In design, you have to make the reference make sense into the character you are making, and if I have to put on my designer glasses instead of my lore hats, then many Genshin character designs don't fit my textbook definition of functional character design, at least based on things I learned from art school. Let's just take examples of characters that Candy did not mention. I don't think Eula's design is good because her outfit contradicts her role as a knight. Her vital areas are exposed, especially her thighs and her back, which are vital areas that you want to protect in battle. Another example is Jean, where they made her wear a suit with a small coat, yet underneath her coat are the tight sleeves that exposes her armpits. It doesn't serve anything for her whether it's combat mobility or prosthetic because it's covered by her coat anyway. I also don't think Auroron's design can be considered good, because they made him wear jeans and leather while people in Masters of the Night's Wind are using a lot of loose fabrics in their outfits. This is not even counting their real-life cultural references, which is already a touchy topic to begin with. Now, to be fair, Realism is not the goal here. Genshin's design are meant to be instantly recognizable, visually appealing, and marketable. However, if I evaluate them through the lens of functional character design, then many of these outfits starts to fall apart. With that in mind, I'll be putting aside most of my lore brain and will be seeing these designs as a designer. Let's take Candy's examples, which all of them are girls, but let me remind you guys again, I'm only basing this on design and using my knowledge in character design, not controversies, so bear that in mind. Mavuika has a zipper that goes all the way from her chest to her vajayjay, then to her back. Even as a man with a banana, this doesn't look comfortable. Thinking about it makes me shiver because how is she comfortable wearing something that is solid beneath her sensitive areas? I think this is a criticism that is well accepted within the community because the most common problem people had with her design is ironically not because of her motorbike aesthetic, since many people can lore justify these design choices, but it's that damned zipper. Man or woman, player or non-player, that zipper is the main issue and I have to agree with this one. Next is Escoffier. One criticism I have is not really her overall design and functionality. If anything, her robotic tail makes sense because she values food safety over everything else and it works as her third hand. My issue is actually much simpler. She doesn't appear to wear anything underneath her apron, which I personally find strange considering she spends most of her time working in a kitchen. Kitchens are hot environments, people sweat, and food hygiene is something Escoffier is repeatedly shown to care about in her lore. Sure, you could argue that she uses a cryovision and therefore stays cool while cooking, but that's exactly what I mean when I say lore justification because that's not an explanation I find very convincing. It's a bit of a shame too because her apron works as a dress and she is giving off the celebrity chef aesthetic that is supported with gold, black, and purple that is usually present in many prestigious aesthetics. Overall, I don't hate Escoffier's design, I just wish they do something under her apron. Next is Feressa. I already said this in my Feressa analysis video and I have very mixed feelings with her design. The thing is, functionality wise, it works really well because less clothing means she has more room to move considering her combat style is heavily inspired by lucha libre or luchadora in female equivalents. Practicality wise, I think it does the job well, and I don't have any complaints on that. My issue lies more with the visual storytelling. Compared to her other peers, her Night Soul markings are less prominent, and the heart and plus motifs scattered throughout her design don't really tell me much about who Feressa is as a person. I actually look back at my video and I really like the redesign I made where the hearts and plus pins are then changed to Natlanese fruits, because it signifies Feressa's other job as an orchidist. The way I had in mind when I made this is to keep everything intact, just make subtle changes while keeping the visuals appealing. It's a very subtle change and more of a nitpick really. Next is Llama. Now I think this is where Candy's opinion with lore justification contradicts her whole video, because out of the characters I pointed out just now, Llama is the very definition of matching with the source material, something that she preached heavily with Columbina as a biblically accurate angel. Llama's design is heavily based on a fertility goddess of the same name in Baltic mythology, Llama. Across many cultures, fertility is often associated with abundance, nature, motherhood, harvests, and the human body itself. Because of that, her design being more revealing does not feel disconnected from her theme. It matches her source material, and the story itself never treats her appearance as something unusual or provocative. Instead, it feels more like an extension of her connection to nature, which is a recurring theme among the Frostmoon Scions. That being said, it is a bit strange that she is the only character within the Frostmoon Scions that is this revealing, especially considering Hoyo has historically toned down some character designs in the past. Whether that's a double standard or simply a different design philosophy, I won't say anything on that. From a character design perspective, I think Llama is one of the stronger designs in the game because the visual elements, symbolism, and source material all support the same core idea. Even if someone personally dislikes the design, I think it's hard to argue that the character isn't communicating exactly what the designers intended. Next is Never, where I kinda have to agree and disagree with Candy here. The leg is spare and I agree they could add a little bit more. But I also think this makes sense because not only Never is a femme fatale type of character, but her top and back already have a lot of things going on. Her cape is already filled with detailed patterns and so is her top, and adding even more details on her legs is only going to crowd her design way too much to the point it's hard to focus on her appeal, which of course is her face. This is where I disagree with the fan redesign that Candy showed. No hate towards the artist because the redesign itself is well made, but the darker stockings add so much visual weight to Nefer's lower body that my eyes immediately go there instead of her face. In character design, especially for a character like Nefer, the face is usually meant to be the focal point. If a secondary element starts competing with that focal point, then the visual hierarchy becomes weaker. In this case, I think Hoyo intentionally left her legs simpler so the viewer's attention remains on her expression and overall presence rather than on a specific clothing detail. Next is Citlali. Visually, I don't really see anything wrong. If anything, she is one of my favorite characters written in-game, and my personal favorite out of all Natlan's design. Not necessarily the best in overall Genshin design, but if we only base it on Natlan alone, then Citlali is definitely my favorite one. Strangely enough, Candy didn't really give a lot of reasons why she doesn't like Citlali's design other than she is wearing a leotard, but this is actually a similar point that I'd like to point out with Nefer as well. If Nefer's design already has a lot of visual information concentrated on her upper body, then Citlali is almost the complete opposite. Most of Citlali's visual complexity is concentrated around her waist and lower body. The layered fabrics, ornaments, tassels, and motifs already create a very busy silhouette. Unlike Oberon, which I commented does not match Masters of the Nightwind culture, Citlali is the opposite of that. Many of the patterns, accessories, and shapes tie back into her tribe's aesthetics and her role within it. Is also the reason why, unlike other Natlanists that have capes on their back, Citlali doesn't have any of that because her bottom already has too many details and her hair is already long enough to make that appealing movement on the back. Giving her another large piece of fabric on her back would probably make the design feel overcrowded. Whether someone likes the leotard itself is ultimately personal preference, but from a design perspective, I can at least understand why the artists chose to keep the upper half of her silhouette relatively simple. Next is Skirk. Candy's main criticism is that she looks more naked compared to her original Fontaine appearance. Technically speaking, I can see where she's coming from because Skirk's current outfit is essentially a very small dress. However, I think that observation ignores how much visual information is already present throughout the rest of her design. Her hands, legs, hair, and even the fabric elements behind her back are filled with details, patterns, and textures. In terms of overall complexity, Skirk is actually one of the busier character designs in the game despite wearing relatively little clothing. I do think Candy raises an interesting point regarding the use of black. Looking back at Skirk's earlier design, the darker colors gave her a stronger sense of mystery and contrast. A little more black in her current design could have worked quite well. That said, I also understand why Hoyo decided to reduce it. Her elemental skill transforms her appearance into a much darker, almost entirely black form, and I suspect they wanted a stronger visual distinction between her normal state and combat state. What I find more interesting is how the design handles visual hierarchy. Even though her limbs contain a lot of detail, the fuchsia eyes help break up the color palette and prevent the design from becoming a single mass of white and blue. The contrast guides your eyes across the character rather than keeping them locked on one specific area. Because of that, I never found her hands or legs distracting despite how detailed they are. Besides, I think her limbs are one of the few examples of a lore justification that I actually find compelling. Skirk is not from Tevat, and according to her character stories, she lost her limbs during Sutologi's brutal training. The limbs we see now are not simply replacements, but physical proof of what she endured and ultimately overcame. In that sense, the unusual design is not just there for aesthetics, it serves as a visual reminder of her past and the sacrifices she made to reach her current strength. Knowing that context actually made me appreciate her design more. Finally, Columbina. At first, I was also on the same page as Candy where I found her hair stands out way too much. In fact, if we return to Columbina being retconned allegations, I think that's also part of the argument. However, after I thought about it again, especially with the current design Columbina has, I started to realize why. If you notice her design, her dress is not even as detailed as her hair. I mean, yes, it is still detailed, but if you look a bit from afar, it looks like she is wearing a rather simple white dress. I think that's the entire point though, because if Nefer and Citlali already have way too much on their top and bottom, Columbina's case is her hair. If you look at Columbina's design closely, a large portion of her facial features are intentionally obscured. Her eyes are always closed, her blindfold covers so much of her face, and her expression is often very subtle. Because of that, the design needs another element to carry her visual identity, and that role falls almost entirely on her hair. The hair is what immediately separates her silhouette from every other character in the game. In fact, the fan design that Candy showed us in her video follows the same principle where they kept her white dress, but they added a bit more details to the point the hierarchy starts to shift a little to her garment. It's not as distracting as the Never one because I think the fan design is really good, but I do prefer the canon design more, considering her movements animations that are coded differently than the general teen girl models. I originally wanted to make fanservice its own section, but I think it naturally fits into the design discussion because a lot of Candy's criticism ultimately comes back to fanservice. The thing is, fanservice is already deeply ingrained into gacha games and has been for years. The important thing to remember is that fanservice doesn't only exist for one audience, nor does it only take one form. Generally speaking, female characters are often designed to appeal through beauty, attractiveness, and sometimes revealing outfits, while male characters are often designed around traits such as confidence, elegance, status, or physical attractiveness in different ways. But even then, these are only broad trends rather than strict rules because character rosters are usually designed to appeal to a wide range of players. For example, not every female characters follow the same design philosophy. Characters like Columbina, Arlecchino, Jin, Chiori, and many others have very different visual appeals compared to characters like Shilonen, Llama, or Nefer. The same applies to the male cast. Zhongli, Neuvillette, Wriothesley, Flints, and Diluc all lean toward a more refined or elegant aesthetic, while characters like Ito, Thoma, Oberon, Aoife, and Tvarka appeal in completely different ways. Let's not forget that my husband of all time, Alhaitham, who somehow manages to sit on both sides of the spectrum at once. The man wears clothes so tight that you can practically see his beautiful pecs and abs through his semi-transparent clothing. Yet he also carries himself with confidence and composure of a scholar. If fanservice was the problem by itself, then Alhaitham would probably be one of the biggest offenders in the entire game. Also, I find it funny she didn't mention Tsubai because she is far from being a fanservice, but regardless, this follows with character behavior as well. Many people liked the insane and unhinged behavior that Lowen has. Many liked Citlali's tsundere behavior, which I personally feel the same way. Many liked the femme fatale that Never has. Many liked how motherly Vloma can feel like. Many liked the chaotic personality that the Hexen Circle has, and as for me, I love Alhaitham's stoic and detached personality, yet he can be secretly caring all the time. I'm an Alhaitham simp, and I believe Kave is me. Yes, I ship Alhaitham with myself. But the point is, that's alright. It doesn't really matter because they're not real. It ultimately comes down to whether you enjoy them or not. Which now... Yep, we're going there. You know that this is coming now. Look, I want to avoid this topic too, but considering it is a very serious accusation and highly demanded, I have to talk about it anyway. If you want to skip this point, you can jump to this timestamp. I'll wait in 5 seconds. Alright, let's continue. So, in Candy's video, she refers to Linnea as a pedophile. I'm not going to repeat that word again for the rest of this video, but it's important for you to know the context. Now, from a design standpoint, I think her design is okay. Compared to the previous characters we talked about just now, I'd say her design is solid, but for my personal taste, it doesn't really stand out to me. The reason I pulled for her is because I used Tsubai as my main DPS, but that's mostly within the meta standpoint, so I won't talk much on that. The thing is, the moment you start accusing a character as such, you need to have more evidence to back up your claim. You can't just accuse a character as such if you don't have enough compelling evidence to prove your point, especially being aggressive about it to the point of forcing your own viewers to open their eyes. The moment you start assigning a label like that to a character, I think the burden of proof becomes much higher. It's no longer a discussion about whether a character is well written or poorly written, you're making a claim about what the story is actually portraying, so naturally people are going to ask for stronger evidence. It's important to note that people view media very differently, and there's a very likely chance that someone who can easily be triggered with such a topic don't even feel triggered to a character because they don't see them that way. This is why you have to be careful of what you say on the internet, and wording is just as important when you want to prove your point. Let's take her example. She uses Linnea's grabby hands that are shown when she looks at Kikaka and Sigewin. Emphasis on Sigewin because she is a Melusine. The thing is, the game never states Linnea is interested in only Melusines because her interests are catered to life in general. Yokai and Melusines are not common in Outcry, which is the reason why she acted quite strongly with other races that are not humans or Fays. Even if we put this context only in her trailer alone, her grabby hands are pointing more to Kikaka over Sigewin. Now true, she is daydreaming of being surrounded with Nekomata yokais and Melusines, which I guess I can understand where Candy is coming from, but claiming her to the extreme end of the spectrum is a little bit of a reach considering that sort of behavior is far more serious in real life if we consider the other end. The trailer does not present Sigewin as a unique target of Linnea's interest, but rather groups Sigewin together with Kikaka, suggesting that Linnea is fascinated by unusual life forms in general rather than any specific individual. The weird thing about what she said is that she will not say anything about Linnea's story quest, which I can understand why. The whole video was taken before Luna VI was out, and her Linnea take was taken after that update as an intermission section, therefore her main reasoning is to avoid spoilers. However, if a character's story quest contains the largest amount of context for understanding that character, then I think it's difficult to make a definitive judgment while intentionally excluding that material from the discussion to prove that point. As far as I know, the only behavior that made Candy believe to be that way is that Linnea is being weird to Paimon as she has never seen anything like her before. The thing is, the Traveler was actually pissed at Linnea for doing that and even being firm about it, causing Linnea to repeatedly and formally apologize. More importantly, the story itself never treats this behavior as a sign that Linnea is dangerous. It treats it as a social boundary issue. The Traveler tells her to stop, Linnea acknowledges she crossed the line, apologizes, and changes her behavior accordingly. Also, another controversial take she brings up is that Linnea I can't believe I say this. Linnea should have been portrayed as disabled. Personally, I'm glad Hoyo did not go in that direction because Linnea's story and lore are not really about disability to begin with. Her conflict revolves around being a Fae and finding acceptance among people who do not fully understand her. That is a different theme entirely. More importantly, I don't think a character needs to be disabled for their struggles with identity, prejudice, or belonging to be meaningful. Those themes can exist independently and still resonate with people. Now, I can understand where Candy is coming from because in her follow-up video, she mentioned that she has a bachelor's degree in early childhood education and is training to become a teacher. We cannot dismiss the fact that this background likely influences how she interprets characters and social behavior, especially when it comes to topics involving children or developmental conditions. I can understand why she feels strongly about those subjects. However, she also doubled down on her interpretation by arguing that Linnea should have been portrayed more explicitly as an autistic character rather than the portrayal we received in-game. Oh my god. I can understand why some players read Linnea through an autistic lens, but Linnea is never canonically stated to be autistic. At least based on the material currently available, the game never presents that as part of her character, and only Nicole was presented as a disabled, making her canonically mute physically. But even that disability wasn't the core part of her lore either. It's the fact that she was punished for it so she can't skite humans anymore. More importantly, Linnea's story is not really about disability. Her central conflict is about belonging, identity, and finding acceptance as a Fae living among people who do not fully understand her. Her blood sister, Kalaino, experiences many of the same struggles for similar reasons. As augury birds, they are expected to possess knowledge and abilities that they simply do not have, creating a disconnect between how others perceive them and who they actually are. This is why Linnea was separated, so she doesn't feel the same struggle, yet she still gets the same treatment anyway. Alright. That's exhausting, but that's the most I can talk about because again, I can only talk about this on my level of understanding, so I won't go beyond that. Let's move on to the final point. Now, I wanted to add gameplay points, but honestly, what she said are mostly valid, so I won't repeat what she said as everything she pointed out are things that are common concerns within the community. There are so many more points that I could add, and like I said, I don't have any say in those topics, mostly because I either don't have any opinion on them or I'm just not the right person to talk about them. That said, my biggest disagreement is not the criticism itself, but the tendency to make very strong claims without equally strong evidence to support them. After I watch her follow-up video, I can see where she is coming from, albeit like her previous video, I don't think she worded it well either. Again, I'm not here for the sake of hating, and even though I personally find her takes to be not that good, she made valid points on some of them. Besides, just because someone made a novel take doesn't mean they're a horrible person. I do think there's a bit of irony in the follow-up video because she talks about the community being toxic, yet a lot of viewers, including myself, felt that the original video itself came across as hostile or dismissive. I have to watch many content creators that react to her to see what they think, like Bran, PyCon, What's FSL, and Jonathan, and I think my conclusion is a lot closer to Bran's. It's almost like you're looking for the problem on something that isn't a problem to begin with, and I have to agree on that. Again, I'm not Candybbug, so I won't make any assumptions on her, but I should point out that you are entering yourself in the ring to begin with, and even for me, after doing content creation for years, wording is very important because you want people to know exactly what you are trying to convey. Sometimes I have to proofread over and over because you don't want to offend people, especially on the internet where you don't know who these people are and can be quite unpredictable. Even then, this doesn't justify her getting death threats either, especially if the context is her having bad takes. I can say this because I can relate with her, especially since this is her very first video that she posted on her channel. I posted a video about Ningguang about 6 years ago, and I think some of you remember this video I made that actually went viral back then. I wasn't even making a commentary, I just said Ningguang don't deserve to be in C tier, and people wanted me dead just because I said that. Back then, I learned a very important lesson. People can disagree with your opinion, but that doesn't mean they should attack you as a person. But like Bran, I also think the same. If this amount of stress outweighs your enjoyment with the game, then maybe it's time to step away. I'm not saying you have to quit, but if you want to take a break, then that's fine. I do that a lot on games that I play, like right now. I haven't played Honkai Star Rail for months, even though I already spent some money for the game. I don't hate it, I just feel the story isn't engaging enough for me like it used to be in Amphoria's arc, and the meta just shifts way too quickly for me to continue on with the game. I might play again eventually, but not right now, and after quitting, I do feel my mental health has recovered for the better. I get it, it can be FOMO and not wanting that investment went down the drain, but sometimes you have to step away even if it's just temporary. Overall, I don't think Candy is wrong. But I won't say Candy is ultimately right either. It was her first video after all, and people often make mistakes over it. She raises valid criticism about Genshin's writing, designs, roster balance, and gameplay, but her takes are often based on fandoms, personal interpretations, and expectations being treated as objective facts. At the end of the day, it's alright to have criticism, arguments, and different perspectives. Just remember to be respectful towards others. It's alright to have a take that turns out to be wrong because that's how people learn and improve their understanding. You have to remember that interpretation is still an interpretation, theories are still theories, and what is applied does not automatically mean it's canon either. This is why I always say, never take references into face value, and this ultimately applies in every interpretation or theory you might encounter in the media, whether from me, bigger content creators, or even your friends. Even so, remember that a bad take does not automatically make someone a bad person, which I believe Candybbug is not one of them. Candy, if you're watching this, I understand that the hate is very overwhelming right now. Take as much time as you need, and when you're ready to return, remember that there are still people willing to listen to what you have to say. You don't deserve harassment over your opinions, and I genuinely wish you the best moving forward.